Greetings, Solar Strike here. Today is a big day. For the better part of 2 years, I've been relying on software emulation, and while it gets the job done with programs such as 86box and PCM, I have not been satisfied with the performance of some of the later chips, like the Pentium 2s or the K6 series, not to mention the lack of anything faster than a Voodoo 3 is going to hinder us in the future. So today, we're going to build a Windows 98 computer to use in projects for the future. So what parts do we have today to assemble? Well, what better place to start than our CPU, a Pentium 3 running at 650 MHz. And if you're used to other CPU generations, you might be thinking, that's not a CPU, that's a card. Well, you'd be right. It's actually both. That leads us into our motherboard of choice. It is none other than the Asus P3BF revision 1.04. A Slot 1 motherboard for Pentium 2s and Pentium 3s from July 1999. Slot 1 platforms have CPUs arriving in a cool package design that just slots into the motherboard, rather than the typical socket many other processors have used before and since. It's a real shame this cool design never lasted long, only being used here as well as the first generation of AMD's Athlon processors. But the motherboard and CPU are only part of the story here. Where's the rest of the parts? Well, we can't simply forget about video, and for this, I have elected to use the NVIDIA GeForce 2 MX, featuring 64 MB of VRAM. A budget offering from the year 2000, it was well regarded as a cheap and easy way to get into the new transform and lighting techniques games were beginning to offer, being roughly performant to NVIDIA's flagship from the previous year, the GeForce 256, a revolutionary card in its own right. Just as important as the video card in a 98 era build is the audio card. And for this, we have in our hands a Sound Blaster Live 5.1, model number SB0100. This card was well regarded as a wonderful choice for games that were hardware accelerated with Creative's EAX technology. Rounding off the rest of our parts list for our build is the storage, and this is where I've gone much higher than is necessary, with a 120GB Max-Tor IDE hard drive, shooting far above what most 98 era systems ship with. The only reason why we can't go higher is because 98 has a limit of 137GB partitions by default, though this can be patched. After that, we have the memory situation, and for this, I'm just gonna go with the 128 MB of SD RAM that was there when I received the motherboard, and a brand new in-box MPREX DVD-RW drive. As a final refresher, here's our specs. Keen viewers may have missed I don't have a case for me to put this system into. And the thing is, I really don't. I was unable to secure a nice era-appropriate case in time for this video, so we'll just have to build on the outside to start with. With that in mind, we've established the power in our hands for this turn-of-the-century powerhouse. So why don't we get it all set up now? Shall we? Oh, crap. Well, it's 3 months later, and as you can tell right here, I have replaced the power supply, and I've also gotten an ETX power button here. I think so. Anyways, I am pleased to reveal that, well, the menu is wonky, but we have a working system! So, let's try to get Windows on it, shall we? Okay, no joke, it has been over 2 hours since I started formatting this disk. That's what I get for 120 gigs. Anyways, I will see you at the install when this is complete, or we have run into some sort of issue. We are almost done with the setup here. It is so glorious to see this. After 3 months just waiting and experimenting for so long. Yeah, it's beautiful to see. I will see you at the desktop. We are now officially at the desktop. Now, time to install some drivers, shall we? Check it out. We have a full 32-bit color depth. Okay, a lot of creative load here. And what seems to be a fully working system here. Well, that was a wonderful amount of kicking and screaming I had to get this machine going. 3 months passed since those last series of clips, and I'm surprised I still managed to get it working. You see, the power supply I had gotten for this machine didn't end up working at all. I had hoped to get this machine going as early as January, but that didn't work out at all. I then spent 3 months scuttling this project until I ended up just harvesting this power supply from a Pentium 4 gateway machine I got a while ago. But I've still got a good bit of benchmarks for you guys today. So let's see how this machine handles some 98 era games up to 2001. For what it's worth, all benchmarks were conducted at a 1024 by 768 resolution with the highest settings possible, unless otherwise stated. Let's start out on the deep end with the king of Windows 98 benchmarks, and that is Quake 3 Arena. Regarded as the go-to game in this era, we're handling the game at max settings at 56 FPS. It's a pretty nice average for this hardware, but then you'd need even more performance to stay competitive in 2000. Still, for a budget GPU, it's great stuff. The next benchmark we'll show off is Unreal Tournament, the other go-to game of this era, as both UT and Quake 3 were fierce competitors in 1999. Regardless, the opening demo plays very smoothly, and in-game, we stay above 45 to 50 FPS most of the time in a 9-player deathmatch. On to another genre, and that's Racing Game Insane, one of the better showings of a wide open field of racing from this era. As you can see, we can determine that we hold a steady 40 to 50 FPS, quite nice for a rudimentary open world game of this era. Let's demonstrate the transform and lighting capabilities of the GeForce 2 MX with third-person shooter MDK2, an interesting shooter with a quirky cast and developed by RPG masters BioWare outside of their usual forte. We can see that we're having an average of 38 FPS, but let's take a look at the difference between transform and lighting effects enabled and disabled. Well, it runs about the same, but hey, it works. For software-based games, this machine does fine too, but at higher resolutions it really does struggle. Quake 2 pulls off a decent showing in OpenGL mode, but software mode struggles at 1024 by 768, as the in-game benchmark only shows 17 FPS on software mode. As a result, it's handily dwarfed by the 70 FPS in OpenGL mode. Still, the Pentium 3 does a formidable job at attempting the effort. However, while those are well-respected games, let's try something that very much wasn't back in the day. That game was the ill-fated 1998 shooter Jurassic Park Trespasser. A sequel to the Lost World film, it garnered intense criticism for its punishing of systems back in the day, among other reasons. However, this build is a bit newer than the game's release. Does it have a sporting chance against the demands of Trespasser? It kinda does. Performance still isn't ideal as you'd think, but it is an improvement from 1998 systems, hovering around the 20s to 30s in most scenes, though the dinosaur sequences lower it a bit. Let us not forget that Windows 98, at its core, is still an MS-DOS based operating system. Naturally, let's try some highlights from that era. First off in our DOS repertoire is Microsoft Flight Simulator 5.1, a high-end flight simulator from 1993. Naturally, this machine having parts 6 to 7 years later, it demolishes through the game with ease despite being a hard game to run back in the day. Our second game on the DOS docket is a build engine game featuring a quippy protagonist with a vengeance towards an otherworldly authority ruining his life by spewing one-liners along the way. Have you guessed the name of the game yet? That's right, it's none other than the first-person shooter Blood by Monolith. Released in 1997 as one of the final pure DOS games, it makes an excellent benchmark, particularly as its higher resolution modes can prove quite taxing, but even at 800 by 600, it still runs the game quite well. The final DOS game we'll show is much older, but does show just how far back we can go with games, and that's none other than Commander Keen 4 from 1991. As you can see, it looks great. Sound may be a bit lacking because I wasn't able to capture it for this project due to a lack of equipment and time, but it looks fine enough. But back to Windows 98 games. The real capabilities for this hardware lie within software that came out a bit after this computer's shelf life of new games. You know, games that came out after 2000 if we built this back in the day. For this, let's test two games that made demanding benchmarks in 2001. Our first game to showcase this is Serious Sam: The First Encounter. Featuring very advanced effects for its day, this Croatian-developed FPS was quite optimized for serious bits of hardware. The benchmark says we're running the game at 27 FPS, and it's nice to be running some slightly newer software. However, where our machine really makes the rubber hit the road is Max Payne, one of the final major Windows 98 games released in July 2001. Being optimized for rapidly evolving technology, this game runs about as well as you'd hope, usually hovering in the 20s with some moments above 30 FPS. It's fine enough, but just goes to show how fast technology was evolving at the time. Our final benchmarks include the 3D Mark trilogy for Windows 98, with each version showcasing different versions of DirectX. The first of these is 3D Mark 99, showcasing DirectX 6 effects. It handily passes the test with a score of 5,008 points, though with our CPU at 9961 points, there is more potential here. The next year, 3D Mark 2000 came out with transform and lighting effects, showcased as part of DirectX 7. It also goes through that test well with a respectable 4175 points. The final test we'll be showcasing today is 3D Mark 2001 SE, but there's a problem. This program showcases DirectX 8.1 effects, but our GeForce 2 MX is only a DirectX 7 capable card. As a result, our machine struggles to maintain a smooth frame rate, only getting 2210 points as a result. Still, this is much newer software that was well beyond this hardware's life. And really, this is a computer meant for running software from the late 90s and very early 2000s, which in terms of that objective, succeeds at that job quite well. And this is far from the only time we'll be seeing this machine. We have so many plans for this rig's life planned in the near future. In fact, I've already added a USB 2.0 card to this build just so I can transfer files easier. Stay tuned for more upgrades like a GPU upgrade and maxing out the memory on this board. But as for me, I think I'll continue craving some more Windows 9X games. But regardless, we finally have a proper Windows 98 build. Let's enjoy some retro and perhaps not so retro escapades together over the next few months.